Welcome to the State of the City pre-show. My name is Erik Hanberg, and I am the host of the Citizen Tacoma podcast. On the podcast, I get to interview elected and community leaders about what's happening in our community. It's a great place to nerd out about civic issues, and that's exactly what we're doing here tonight on the pre-show. We are previewing Mayor Victoria Woodards' State of the City conversation. Tonight's theme is our economy, and the mayor will be discussing innovation and recovery in Tacoma's businesses. And my guests today, or tonight I should say, to preview this conversation are Dr. Anthony Chen, Director of the Tacoma-Pierce County Health Department. Welcome, Dr. Chen.
Glad to be here.
I'm also joined by Bill Robertson, President and CEO of Multicare. Welcome, Bill.
Good evening. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. And of course, the woman of the hour herself, Mayor Victoria Woodards. Thank you for being here tonight, Mayor.
Thank you so much, Erik, and thank you for hosting us.
I'm excited to be here. So an astute viewer might have noticed that to talk about economy and innovation and recovery, I have a couple of healthcare professionals with me tonight. Because health and healthcare, while they've always been part of the economy, of course, community health is really in the driver's seat right now of our economy. And so, Dr. Chen, I want to start with you. What message would you have for businesses who are struggling right now with reduced capacity and some of these restrictions and who are worried? How do you think about them when you're creating these guidelines or the state guidelines or implementing them?
Yeah, COVID-19 undoubtedly has impacted our businesses and also, there are many employees. And this is very important for us on a public health standpoint because we know, income and wealth and having a job and subsequently a roof over your head and you're being able to eat and so on, very important for health, right? And we understand that this has been a huge issue for our businesses. But I think at the same time, even though there are, we know that COVID-19 restrictions impact businesses, so do outbreaks, right? So currently in Pierce County, we have 10 businesses with 60 or more employees dealing with an outbreak. And, we only report those businesses with 10 or more cases. But what the public doesn't see on our website is that every day it's not unusual for us to be working with 40, 50 businesses and 30, 40 schools that have cases in them. And while those don't qualify as outbreaks, and many times those were cases acquired outside of the workplace, the problem is those have impacts. I mean, I was talking to someone, their son worked in a coffee shop. They had to close the coffee shop down because there were so many people who had to be quarantined that they couldn't keep it running. And I've heard the same, and Bill probably has heard, is very aware of this too. There are healthcare providers' offices where there's so many people who have to quarantine or they're out sick that, it's very hard for them to keep going. So, and certainly for kids in school, I mean, one of the heads of schools was telling me about a month ago, they had 30 kids out on quarantine because of an exposure. And there's another school where the principal basically shut down the whole school because some kids decided they were going to have a slumber party and a bunch of kids were potentially exposed, right? So, and that means those kids are not in school. We worked really hard to get the kids back in school. And if they're being quarantined, then they're going right back to, virtual learning. So, we really need to continue to work together. I do applaud the businesses that have been very creative, expanded takeout services for restaurants, dog grooming and retail providing curbside service. I mean, even our Vital Records, which handles birth certificates, death certificates, we have, online, you can order your certificates online, or in some cases, if you really need it in a hurry, we do curbside pickup, right? So lots of people have shifted. I think, a lot of times you see me working at home and, fortunately some businesses have been able to do that, but we know that not all businesses can do that. Yeah. But in spite of the restrictions, I mean, Tacoma-Pierce County remains a wonderful place to live and a wonderful destination to visit. And Mayor, I know you brag about our city often, but, we have great parks, a zoo, museums and all that. So hopefully we can work with the community, get the rates back down, and then kind of get us back to some kind of recovery soon.
Dr. Chen, I want to ask you about the health department's Vax to the Future campaign. So I'm getting Marty McFly on here. So I just want to check in on that, because it seems like, if someone wants to support their favorite restaurant, the first thing they should do, order takeout from them, like do business with them. But the second thing that they should do is to get vaccinated, because that'll help us bring down case counts and that'll help that business reopen. Is that about right? Is that the message of that campaign?
Well, it is really important, but the vaccination is the long-term strategy, right? And what we need, there's kind of like a immediate strategy we need to do, which is people need to do all those preventive measures we talked to them about, right? Wearing the mask, keeping the physical distance, trying not to gather. We're seeing a lot of outbreaks now. We're not seeing like big super spread events. What they are small gatherings, whether they're family or friends, and they're gathering together. We need people to avoid that. So what we can do immediately is really double down on all those preventive measures. That's our short-term strategy. The long-term strategy, you're absolutely right, is people need to get vaccinated. So we're currently averaging about 5,300 doses a day. Last week, we administered 40,000 doses, and half of those were new, first-time doses. And about a third of our county residents have received at least one dose of vaccine. So that's really good. I mean, it's going up every day, it's going up every week, but we're still shy of that 70-80% vaccination rate we need to get real community immunity. So the light at the end of the tunnel is glowing. It's not bright yet, but we're getting there.
Okay. Mayor Woodards, do you have anything that you want to add about the link between, vaccinations, our phases, and our local business community?
I remember early on when we were having this conversation, I kept saying we all have an opportunity here to be superheroes, and because this is not something that's out of our control, meaning we can affect change if we do the right things. We saw us do that last summer and into the fall, when we actually were able to get to phase 3. We were able to open back up. But I think in the excitement, and I would also say in the excitement and in the frustration of dealing with COVID, and I understand it, we kind of backed off some of those initiatives. So I just, my thing to everybody is if we are really worried about our businesses, if we want to go to that special place for dinner, or if we want to be able to go into one of our local shops and purchase something, and not have to stand in line because only 25% of the people can get in. If those are the kinds of things we want to do, then when we leave those shops and those restaurants, we've got to get back to those habits that got us there in the first place. And so I would just remind everybody, it's great to be upset about it. I mean, it's not great to be upset about it, but if you're upset about it, it's okay. You can feel those emotions. But the most important thing is that we want to get to this herd immunity. We want to get to this 75 to 80%, so that our economy can open back up, and we can make sure that all of our businesses, whether it is retail or otherwise, whether it is small or large, that all of our businesses can open back up and be a part of our economy. We know that businesses are the backbone of what makes a city work. It isn't just one thing. It really is our businesses, and we've got to support them, not just by going there, do that, but also by doing the right things when we're not in those businesses.
Thank you very much. Bill, I don't want to leave you out. I want to get to you. So you're at Multicare, and I know that this year has been really hard on everyone, of course, but I also think about the emotional and the mental toll of the healthcare providers, and that it's got to be particularly burdensome. What they've been through has been nothing short of heroic. How do you, as both, an employer of a lot of these folks, but also, just as someone, who's serving the community, how do you think about the mental health and the emotional well-being of the workforce right now as we emerge from COVID-19? Like if people are, right now just surviving this pandemic, how do we get them to thriving again?
Now, that's a great question, one that we talk about frequently, not just inside Multicare, but in the broader healthcare community. Mayor Woodards talked about we can all be heroes, and I think about my colleagues, those inside Multicare and those inside the Franciscan organization, across the Washington State Hospital Associated organizations, that there are a lot of heroes who put one foot in front of the other in an environment over the last year where, at least early on, we didn't know a lot about healthcare, about the virus and what it might mean for people and their health and those types of things. And I think sometimes the definition of a hero is not that they're not afraid or that they aren't concerned. It's that they go in and do their job in extraordinary ways, even in the midst of that uncertainty and that fear. But that does wear on you. There's no question about uncertainty, and life's uncertain. We all know that. But that kind of uncertainty about not knowing what the best kind of care to give and whether you're going to get sick or not out of this really has been wearing on not just our clinical staff, but all those who support the clinical staff to make sure they can do their jobs. And so it has having access to better PPE, the early stages when there wasn't enough PPE and we couldn't test and there was no vaccine on the horizon, that has been was really difficult. I would say that having the vaccine available it's almost a party atmosphere when people are getting their vaccine. Yep. Because they've gone so long with uncertainty and fear, but it affects how people see the world. And so we as an organization have been very proactive trying to support our team members with things like how do they access childcare, and how do we make sure that their job continues even when the patient volumes were declining and things like that. And how do you support people who are taking care of people who are having an increasing amount of behavioral health challenges in our community? One of the things I would suggest is that the social determinants of health, which have been dramatically impacted by COVID and our response as a society to that, has created mental health challenges in our kids and in adults. And we're seeing those individuals come into our organization. So it isn't just caregivers who are experiencing mental health challenges, it's also our community more broadly. And so the solutions are probably not just out of healthcare, they're out of society, getting people back to work, which, as you heard from Dr. Chen and Mayor Woodards, that means doing the things that are necessary to get back to work. Yep. Get your vaccine, wear your mask, social distance as appropriate, wash your hands, all those types of things. Those help us get back to a more stable environment, which helps mental health. And I think that is a big part of getting to, I'm not going to call it the new normal, the next normal, the next environment in which we find ourselves, where COVID, quite frankly, is endemic. It's going to be part of our, the world we live in for the foreseeable future.
So, I think about some of the precautions that we've been taking over the last year, and there was something that was new for me where, I wasn't just trying to prevent myself from getting COVID, but I was worried about like the systemic risk of, what would happen if we overwhelm hospitals and ICUs. And I know in some communities around the world and even in the United States, they got really close to that. And I think it really showed everyone how tightly bound, the economy and healthcare were, and how close we all are in a way that we never truly understood, at least for me. How has your thinking of community wellness changed over this last year?
Well, I love that question. Multicare has this perspective that they are inextricably tied together. We want this to be the healthiest port city in the world. That's our kind of internal rubric that we're working against. But what this did is it essentially affirmed that worldview that a healthy economy and a healthy community are tied together, and that dealing with social determinants of health is integral to how we create a healthier community. Having a healthy economy is integral to how we create a healthier community. Because when you knock some of those supports out, which is what happened when people lost their jobs and people couldn't socialize and kids weren't in school and childcare was a problem, all those types of things, it had dramatic impact on health status and on our economy. Both of them were dramatically impacted in ways that we're only really probably starting to figure out some of the impacts. here's an odd impact that we're starting to see. Kids show up in our ER at Mary Bridge with ruptured appendix. They don't have COVID. Its parents are concerned about consuming healthcare because of COVID, and so they wait longer, and so they end up with a ruptured appendix. So if your kid has belly pain, take them to the hospital. It's safe. It's better than having a ruptured appendix. So it's interesting how behavior changed in the midst of this because of the concern and anxiety and fear that we have had. So really, it's all tied together. You can't have one without the other. You can't have the other without the one.
Right. Yeah. One of the things I think also we saw in healthcare were, there was workplace safety precautions that you took, but also workplace safety innovations. And I'm thinking about things like telehealth, virtual medicine, which I know existed before the pandemic, but it really took off in the last year. And they were about workplace safety, but also sometimes people just found like, hey, this is really convenient. I like this. How much do you think some of those things will be sticking around beyond the pandemic?
We have this perspective that a huge swath of what we learned has transformed how we're going to take care of people going forward. It's very interesting how virtual medicine was not necessarily, it was present, but not a big deal. And overnight, literally over just 3 or 4 or 5 days, we were able to expand our virtual medicine so that we went from seeing 20 virtual medicine patients a day for about 600 a month to seeing 1,300 a day. So 40,000 a month. A very dramatic change. In the behavioral health space, it's very interesting that the people seem to like consuming their behavioral health care more in a virtual setting than an in-person setting. So that's going to stick around. But there's other things that are probably invisible. The type of care that we were able to innovate over the last year as healthcare professionals, we take care of COVID patients for sure, radically differently today than we did just a year ago, because clinicians have learned so much, so huge amounts of innovation in that space. And then we've innovated in interesting ways in our community. There were no manufacturers of N95s in the state of Washington a year ago. And today, we buy a significant percentage of our N95s that we use in our ambulatory space from a Washington-based organization that switched over to doing this, and it's a great product. And so we're now protecting our employees with a Washington-based product. So lots of innovation in lots of different spaces, not just healthcare, but across the spectrum that supports a healthier community.
That's really great. And Mayor Woodards, we aren't just seeing that in healthcare, as Bill just said. We're seeing that in government. I think here we are on a Zoom call doing the state of the city, but businesses too. How are you seeing the community innovate and change in ways that you think will last just beyond this moment? The mayor is muted.
How could the mayor be the one to make the muted mistake today? No. What I was going to say is that everybody has innovated, right, and changed how they do business. And I'll just very quickly just take the city, for instance, right? It used to be you could only get to a council meeting and testify if you were there in person. We will never go back to only in-person meetings now. And so the pandemic has caused us to innovate in some ways, but I think some of that innovation, as you all will hear, not giving away any secrets about the show tonight, but as you all will hear tonight, some of the innovation has actually helped the businesses thrive even better than they were before. Not by any means to ignore the fact that some of our very longstanding businesses in Tacoma couldn't survive and have closed. And while that's heartbreaking, some newer businesses have thrived and innovated and stood up new businesses during COVID. We think about those who have pivoted, as Bill just mentioned, no N95 masks. There are lots of people making masks and PPE that are just local. They pivoted from what they were doing, and they used their skill set to then do something different in the pandemic. And so I've seen it happening. I think it shows us how creative we can be when challenged. And so I'm really grateful for that with our businesses, but I think we're going to do it together. If we're going to do it, we got to do it together.
Well, the theme you chose for the State of the City this year is transforming our destiny together. You know, the City of Destiny. I love it. I'm curious, you know, and you can actually wrap us up here for this conversation. How do you see the community transforming our destiny together in terms of the economy, health? No spoilers for what's coming next, but how do you think about that?
You know, so just real quickly, and we won't do this every, but when, you know, transformation is the word of the transformation and unprecedented, and you're on mute. Those are the three words of the most used words of the year. And so when I thought about, am I going to sit up and give a speech on transformation? It's like, we have to do this work. And the reason that we are where we are in this pandemic, all of the good and all of the challenging, is because we've done it together. We're sitting here with the president of one of our local health systems and Dr. Chen, the director of our health department. And while they're both in health, Bill Robertson is a local business owner, right? He's running a business in Tacoma and is working with all of our businesses. So they're inextricably linked. And so you can't say it's either a person's health or the survival of a business. We can absolutely do it together. And that's what you're going to hear a little bit about tonight, is how we've been doing it, how we'll continue to move forward together. And I know nobody wants to hear this, but how in some instances, we are even better off because of the pandemic, because we could no longer do business as usual. And so change wasn't an option, it was a necessity.
It was indeed.
So, what's that?
It was indeed.
It was, absolutely. So excited to kick off tonight's first State of the City conversation on our economy. I think this is a really important conversation to have and to learn from. And again, we will transform our destiny, and it'll only be transformed well if we do it together.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Dr. Chen. I really appreciate everyone being here for the pre-show. And let's get on to the State of the City. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. Thanks, Bill.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States
y la república
for which it stands,
one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for
para
all.
todos.
Welcome to the State of the City conversation on our economy, a discussion in which we will discuss innovation and recovery from COVID-19. I'm so grateful to have joining me today Workforce Central CEO Katie Condit, entrepreneur and owner of Campfire Coffee, Quincy Henry, and the president and CEO and one of the most optimistic people I know, Bruce Kendall. Bruce, thanks for being here with us today. You know, businesses are not just the foundation of our economy. They contribute to Tacoma's character, and they create opportunities through the jobs they provide. COVID has truly challenged businesses and job seekers in many unique ways. Along with the federal, state, and county support, the city itself has stepped up to provide more than $2.7 million in grants and loans to help small businesses and micro businesses through this tough time. Another round of business grants is now being processed, which will bring us to a total of $3.3 million. But at the same time, our private sector and job seekers have been innovating and adapting to these ever-changing conditions. The City Council and I know that a strong economy makes for a much stronger Tacoma. And I'm excited to hear from our guests who have joined me today. Katie, it is so good to see you, to meet you in person today. And thank you so much for choosing to be a part of Tacoma's economy and providing jobs. You know, as a member of your board, I obviously have some firsthand knowledge in the work that we're doing there, helping the organization and job seekers to connect to jobs and training programs, and then also working with our employers. I'm grateful for you being here today, and I've just got a question for you. How has the professional landscape changed? We've seen a lot change in this year of COVID, but how has the professional landscape been changed by the pandemic?
It's a great question, and I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for having me. You know, I think if we've learned anything in this pandemic, it's that people and workers are not simply a means to production. We have whole human lives that have been on display over the last year. We have families and children and neighborhoods we live in and communities we care about. And it's really challenged the way we've thought about the separation between work and everything else in our lives. And that won't be unlearned. I think that will challenge the professional landscape as we move forward and think about what it means and looks like for employers and businesses to take care of the people who work for them.
Yeah, you know, I was just thinking, when we hired you in COVID, right? So the idea of coming into someone's office or sitting around with a panel of people being interviewed, right? That's all gone. So how has it changed? How are we innovating? How's the market innovating? Even just how we're connecting job seekers with the actual employers?
It's a great question. So we typically approach our work in workforce development from a job seeker perspective. So we talk a lot about the skills gap, and while there are pieces of truth to that, we have to think of both sides of the equation. So I think what's changing moving forward in our work is the focus on both the businesses and employers and the job seekers. So businesses have to adapt just as job seekers do. We have assets in our job seeker and worker community that we're not tapping into because we're thinking about skills in different ways, or we're posting jobs in ways that may or may not resonate with those job seekers' skills. So our work has changed because we're working on the business side to help really develop training, hiring, and recruiting efforts that connect with job seekers, and then in turn on the job seeker side to pretty rapidly skill people up and have them ready for opportunities. So it's a both and we can't miss either side of that equation.
You know, my theme, I mean, the theme for this year's State of the City is, you know, transforming our destiny together. And the true word is what I appreciate about what you said is that we're doing this work together. It can't just be focused on job seekers or just on businesses. You've got to focus on both. But speaking of businesses, we've got Quincy here from Campfire Coffee. And so, Quincy, thank you so much for joining us. Your industry has been hit probably the hardest of all industries when we think about retail and restaurants. So tell us a little bit about how you've been surviving COVID and what kind of support you've gotten through this time.
That's a big question.
Yeah.
And the answer is actually really a testament to the character of Tacoma, because we, you know, a lot of people know or may not know, we had hoped to get open March of last year. And, you know, a little pandemic happened.
Yeah, that little thing.
A little pandemic happened. And, you know, the people of Tacoma, first and foremost, almost galvanized, not just around Campfire, but a lot of small businesses. But I can say that the people of Tacoma rallied behind us within our pivot. We decided, my wife and I, kind of overnight, that instead of just throwing our hands in there, that we would take our coffee and our merchandise and pivot online and start an online store, which is something that we thought we wouldn't do for a couple of years. And it was the people of Tacoma that took our brand, took our story. We were very open, very transparent about some of the setbacks and struggles we had gone through. They took that and they literally ran with it across the globe. By the time we got open in August, we had shipped to every state in the country. and a couple of foreign countries, Japan and Canada. So it's just, we pivoted, and we had the good fortune of the people of Tacoma rallying behind us and making our dream come true for us.
That is, well, we are so glad that you persevered and are here now. And it's a great segue to Bruce Kendall, who's joined us, whose job is to make sure that businesses come to and thrive in Tacoma, and who's done a lot of work around innovating in this time. And so, Bruce, thank you for being here and for all the work that the EDB has done through the pandemic. We know that 2020 was a year of multiple pandemics. There was the pandemic of COVID, there was the systemic racism pandemic, a lot for businesses to deal with. But the EDB stepped right up and not only talked about the change, but wanted to be part of the change and help educate employers about how we could do a better job. So tell me, how have you all mapped this out? How are you all moving forward and navigating and providing support in both of those areas?
Well, 13 months ago, we were all there, right? We didn't know we'd be sitting here today still in the middle of a pandemic, which caused businesses across the board to, in some cases, stop what they were doing and reinvent themselves, or in other cases, turn to different ways of delivering the same service to their customers that they've been, and products they had been delivering all along. And working from home, that changed, doing many more things online, trying to figure out how to get employees back into the businesses. Cash flow was a huge issue. If you don't have cash flow, you're not in business. I know everybody can relate to that. And so the government programs that emerged, and you mentioned some at the outset that the city is to be applauded for in terms of financial relief for companies to help them just respond to the hurricane they found themselves in, so that they could then later, and that's the place we're in now, where we're starting to see recovery. Companies are now talking seriously about how they're going to get employees back into the workplace safely, how they're going to keep the markets that they saved, and if they expanded into markets, keep those new markets as well. And those programs at the federal, state, and local levels have just been in many cases, life saving, certainly business saving. And so our role in all of this was to turn from our day-to-day conversations with companies about what do you need to keep expanding in our marketplace or to come in for the first time. The question became, how do we help you survive? And a lot of it was getting them access to personal protective equipment or loan and grant programs through various government agencies. And so we became, I don't know if we're experts or not, but we became very good at getting people to the resources they needed, companies to the resources they needed. And the whole organization, from the board of directors, which you serve on, and thank you for that, to the staff and our partners, did a really good job with that. We partnered very closely with the city's economic development department, which just was huge in this effort as well. And so that became the next 6 or 7 months. Yeah. As we headed into that, the second part of your question, the tragedy of George Floyd's murder and Manny Ellis's death as well, raised an issue that we should have been asking ourselves about for decades, but never had. Certainly we'd done work in historically disadvantaged communities and in the BIPOC community, but never intentionally. It just sort of happened when it happened because we were focused on our traditional economic development work. And so what our board did was they spent a summer, and we as at the staff level, of listening. We talked to, Mayor, you were terrific in this, helping us bring folks together into the organization that weren't typically involved in what we do. A lot of small businesses, we're not a small business shop in most cases, but bring some small business owners in from these historically disadvantaged communities and ask them, what might we do to help you? We can't invent something ourselves if we're not smart enough. We need you to help us get smarter. And we learned a lot during the summer. So then the organization started to look at its work program. And so we've added things to our work program that are specific tactical outreaches to businesses in historically disadvantaged communities. How that's all going to work, our work plan is a 5-year work plan, so we're taking the long view. How that's all going to work in practice, we're going to find out. We're going to try some things and see how they go, and partner with some local organizations to make that happen. And then at the board level, we looked at who we were, and if you looked around the room, we were predominantly white, male, and older was who was in charge at the Economic Development Board, and we realized this is not reflective of our community. It should have been obvious to us before that, and it took, unfortunately, those events to help us realize that. So we redid our bylaws, and we added some new positions, and we had some people rotate off, and we're happy to say that we've got a lot of interest from folks who will help us diversify the board and being on the board of directors and helping guide us. So we brought our first class of new board members on last month. And
time goes by so fast right now. You can't keep up.
Right, and their first board meeting with everybody else will be day after tomorrow. So we're looking forward to that, and a long way to go, but those two pandemics, as you put them, the social pandemic and the health pandemic, those are some of the ways we addressed those last year.
So Katie, and thank you for that, Bruce. Katie, Bruce just kind of talked about, the BIPOC community and how they focused on board members, but they can't focus on those board members if we're not providing those businesses job seekers, right? If we're not making the connection between people who are looking for employment and these companies. So just talk to me a little bit. How is workforce development? How are you all focusing on the BIPOC community and getting people back to work?
Historically in our workforce development world, we've looked at job seekers from a deficit perspective. And what you said resonates so deeply with me, in that the people of Tacoma and the people of Pierce County have assets. Our people, they're resilient, they have grit, they have talent, and so our job in connecting job seekers and preparing them for the workforce is tapping into those assets and building upon those assets. And what we've historically done is approached communities of color, individuals with disabilities, from a deficit perspective. And in workforce development, that just won't work anymore, and it's baked into our systems. And so part of working with job seekers is identifying and building those assets, and then communicating those to businesses. And on the business end, working on things like position descriptions, hiring, what we think we need as employers, versus what we really do need in some of these jobs. And a great example is, the bachelor's degree that's slapped onto most position descriptions we see, depending on the industry, and working with employers to ask the critical question, is that actually necessary? And what are the skills that come with that are necessary for the position you're hiring for, and breaking that down. And for some jobs it may be, but for the majority who are using it, it's typically credentialing for credentialing's sake. And so we're getting really clear with businesses and then also with job seekers about articulating that skill match. And we're making matches for job seekers who never thought they'd fit because of the way a job was described. And so it's that work on both ends that matters.
Well, and it's really getting at the heart. It's the human capacity, right? It's everybody has a gift or a talent to be used. The question is, how do we make room for that gift and talent? And so the fact that you all are being really explicit in, is that really necessary? Does the person who answers the phones really need to have a driver's license when they don't drive? When they drive at no point in their day, right? But just those little barriers are what get in the way of really sometimes moving our focus, or moving us forward in this conversation around diversifying our workforce. So we're talking about diversity and systemic racism, and we're looking at a BIPOC business owner right here in front of us today. So Quincy, tell me, as a Black business owner in Tacoma, we know, number one, that the businesses owned by people of color already struggle more than a lot of businesses, but you're successful, and if you can be successful in the worst time in the country, I can't wait to see what Campfire Coffee does coming out of COVID. But being a BIPOC community, how have we supported you? Have you received any of this assistance that we talk about? And how do we make sure that our BIPOC businesses stay thriving? How do people like the EDB and Workforce Central, how do they bring you employees? How do we support you as a growing business and checking with you to find out how you can expand and become not just Campfire Coffee in Tacoma, but why not a Campfire Coffee in every city in America?
Why not? Why not? Fantastic question. Thank you. You know, yes, we actually finally were eligible for a funding program that the city of Tacoma made available. And it was kind of an ironic, I don't want to say ironic, it's not the right word, but it was an odd scenario in that just the timing of when we got open, we were not eligible for any of the
Because you were new.
We were new.
Right.
But we were absolutely impacted by the pandemic, right? We still had costs, we still had rent, we still had, and we couldn't get open. There were all these things that we were up against. And we didn't even know, and partly was, you know, not having really the bandwidth to seek out that information, but we didn't know that there were programs out there that the city had until I just made a post on Twitter one day, and then someone from the city reached out and said, I'm gonna come by. And Deirdre did come by the shop one day and let us know that, hey, the city of Tacoma is here. We do have programs that are available. Understand that you weren't eligible for any of the other government programs, but we just rolled out X amount of dollars for businesses. And you know, this was just recently we were able to apply, we were able to get that, and you know, as it was mentioned, you need that cash flow there. And we were surviving just off cash flow and kind of bootstrapping and scraping, but to be able to have extra funds to hire and retain the employees that we have. And you know, there is a certain weight that gets lifted where now I can start to look forward as a business owner and plan months in advance, as opposed to, wow, you know, what do we need to hit this week to make sure that payroll is solid or anything like that. But yeah, you know, I think in terms of just, you know, finding out what the BIPOC business community needs, I was really blown away by the outreach that the city had done in actually finding us. Like I said, you know, one of the big barriers there is just not knowing the certain programs that are there. We just don't know. And it sounds weird that in this era where everything's done virtually and you're Zoom calling this and you're FaceTiming that, it took someone who literally knocked on our door, literally, to make us aware of it. And I think we need more of that on both sides of the ball. We need to be going up to the city, the economic development and parts of the city, and just asking what is available. Now that we know that it's there, it can make all the difference in the world.
Well, I think also a lot of times for BIPOC businesses, even knowing that it's there, but it's not accessible to us. I mean, so even the idea of being able to go and ask for it when traditionally
you don't get it.
You don't get it. So that's great though. I'm proud of our economic development department that they actually reached out to you to work with you. And Bruce, you see this all the time. I mean, you're talking to businesses every day. So as we look into kind of the future of economic development in Tacoma and Pierce County, and we think about a strong recovery and not just into the future, but a brighter future than we had before. What do you think give me one or two factors you think that we really need to focus on that would support a strong recovery?
Well, we've just talked about one that just needs to keep going, and that is support.
Yeah.
We're all in this together, and so relationships have been created, and Quincy, you just talked about a great one that you now have with the city. We need to build on that relationship and help other companies that may not yet be aware because they're running their businesses. They don't have the time necessarily to look things up in endless websites. So what can we continue to do proactively to find businesses to let them know what's available and help them take advantage of that? Because fundamentally it's people. This is why I'm an optimist. People finding people and working with them. So we need to keep doing that. We cannot go back. I don't think anyone's intending to do this, but you know, human beings are interesting folks. You know, we don't want to fall back to, okay, well, we got through that. You know, now I'm going to go back to the old network I used to work with. Katie was talking about this. We can't keep doing things the old way because, one, we're better if we do it the new way with the expanded ecosystem of relationships we've got. So continue those partnerships. The other is, and I just loving sitting with an entrepreneur, give businesses space to innovate. Let's make sure they have breathing room to expand and explore and try and fail sometimes, but then recover from that. You know, for example, we have to make sure that as government deals with all of the expenses that the governments had to go through, whether it's the city level or the county level, the state level, the federal level, there's a lot of money being spent that's got to get paid back someday or recovered someday. Let's try not to do that on the backs of businesses. I don't think that's anybody's intent. I know it's certainly not your intent, but budgets are going to be a struggle for cities for a long time, and for the state government as well. So let's make sure that we're not burdening businesses with new taxes and regulations as they emerge out of this pandemic and try to hire more people in our community and be successful. So yeah, those are the two things I would say initially we got to keep our eye on, and I think we will. I think that there's a really good understanding. If anyone was ever in doubt whether we're all in this together as humans, throw a pandemic at the globe.
Right.
Guess what?
You'll find out how all together.
My problem's your problem.
Absolutely.
Your problem's my problem. So let's not forget that.
Well, and so with that, as you've given us some advice as we close out, I guess I would just ask all of you this question. What gives you hope? What gives you hope for job seekers and employers in the year ahead? And what advice would you offer both job seekers and potential business owners as we come out of this pandemic? Because we are going to survive this pandemic. We're going to come out of it. We're going to be stronger because we went through it together. But what gives you hope? What gives you hope, and what advice might you give?
What gives me hope is a theme that's been echoed throughout this conversation. It is the people of Tacoma and Pierce County and the connectedness of Tacoma and Pierce County. You know, what this pandemic proved in this community is no one is doing this alone. No one has to do this alone, and I don't think we're trying to do it alone anymore. And that's been a brilliant outcome, if we can say that, of the pandemic, and that gives me hope. You know, I think advice to job seekers and businesses would be, don't be afraid to think differently in terms of what it looks like to connect between workers and businesses. We often think of human-centered design and business-centered design as two separate things, and they're actually braided and don't need to be. And let's not be scared to think a little differently about what that looks like based on what we've learned over the past year.
That's awesome. Bruce?
Well, what gives me hope is the resiliency that we have all shown, our business community, our government, the flexibility. Amazing. Entrepreneurs have always been flexible. They're like the definition of flexible. Now the rest of us are really flexible too, or we wouldn't be sitting here today. So that gives me a lot of hope. And my advice would be always plan for better days, because that's what's going to happen. And it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Always plan for better days, and we're starting to see it. You know, we're seeing some green shoots out there of new businesses being created. Businesses have continued to be created during this pandemic, and if you look at world history, during economic downturns, that's when a lot of the great companies of the future get created. And so we need to nurture those so I would say, keep doing that, everybody. Keep doing what you're doing. Yeah.
All right, we'll hear the last word from the business owner himself. What gives you hope?
The city, the people here are special. And I say that from a place of, another life, being a musician, being on the road. I spent time in a lot of great American cities, and Tacoma is just different. It's just a unique place with this spirit behind it and this energy that it's hard to describe. It's hard to try to put into words. If you could take the better parts of certain big cities and jam them into one mid-sized one, that's what Tacoma is. And to me, that, and it's been proven through our story, even though it's only been about a year old now, that community means something. So that's what really gives me hope. And the advice I'd give to anybody is to take that nugget with you of knowing that you've got a community behind you, and just keep moving forward. Keep moving forward. For every no you get, there's a yes waiting around the corner. So just keep going and keep knowing that Tacoma has your back. The city does.
That is awesome. You know, people often ask me, and I say this a lot, people often say, you know, oh, Tacoma's so beautiful. You've got this incredible waterfront. You got Mount Rainier, you got a bustling downtown and all these business districts, right? And everyone is distinct, right? You can go to Proctor, or you can go to 38th Street, right? And it's all different, but it's all Tacoma. And we've got museums and colleges, right? And it's like, what makes Tacoma so special? And every time I say, it's the people. It is the people that make Tacoma what it is. And I'm so grateful that we have you, that we have you as a part of the fabric and the success of our city. So Katie, Bruce, Quincy, thank you so much for joining me today to have this conversation. Bruce used a word, and he said resilient. And resilient is a part of our community's DNA. You can see it now. We've seen it in the last year, but you can see it now that no matter how hard it gets, we get back up, Quincy, and we keep fighting. We pivot, we innovate, and that's what makes Tacoma. We are resilient. And that shows up in how we work together across all sectors. As you've seen today, from a business owner to an organization that supports economic development to another organization that provides workers and training to those businesses. But we're all in this together. And we are finding ways to continue to be resilient and to continuing to innovate, and not just for ourselves individually, but for this city. You heard Quincy say it. Tacoma is a special place. Now, let's be clear. This is just a single conversation about economy, and there's so much more that we could talk about, and look forward to continuing to have those conversations. But the city's responsibility and my commitment is that we will come out of COVID even stronger, and we will continue to support our businesses and do whatever needs to be done, because we do know that the backbone and the success of our city is our businesses. So let's be clear. If you're a local business and you want to know more about how to get support in the city of Tacoma, you please may go to makeittacoma.org for a full listing of all the resources we have and the COVID business assistance that we are providing. The site is continuously updated with new federal, state, and local opportunities. So thank you for joining us for this conversation, and please join us for the next State of the City conversation, where we're going to talk about our neighbors, and we'll discuss housing and homelessness. Thank you so much.